Welcome to the back room. Relax, unwind, and let our soothing gangster bedtime stories guide you into calm and peaceful sleep. Here we tell the quieter side of history, the childhoods, ambitions, and lives of legendary gangsters, without focusing on violence. As you settle in, share with us in the comments where you're listening from, what time it is right now, and one good thing that's happened to you today. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoy our stories, please like this video to support the channel, and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Your encouragement helps us bring more Mafia bedtime stories to life. Now close your eyes, feel at ease, and enjoy tonight's story. Wishing you peace and the sweetest dreams.
The city of St. Petersburg, known in this twilight era as Leningrad, does not sleep. Not truly. During the white nights of late June, the sun dips just below the horizon, refusing to fully abandon the sky. It leaves behind a strange, milky luminescence, a bruised purple twilight that erases the distinction between day and night, dream and reality. In this half-light, the city feels suspended in time, a grand, crumbling theater waiting for the next act to begin. It is 1989. The air is cool and damp, carrying the scent of the Baltic Sea mixed with the exhaust of cheap diesel fuel and the wet, ancient stone of the embankments. The Neva River flows silently, a wide, gray artery pulsing through the heart of a dying empire. On a bridge overlooking the water stands a man. He is not remarkable at first glance. He wears a simple coat, his hands resting on the cold iron railing. He is still, perfectly still, while the few passers-by hurry past, heads down, collars turned up against the chill. They move with the nervous energy of people who sense that the ground beneath their feet is shifting. The Soviet Union is cracking. You can feel it in the air, see it in the peeling plaster of the Winter Palace, hear it in the whispers of the queues lining up for bread. But the man on the bridge does not hurry. He watches the water. He watches the last of the winter ice breaking up far out in the Gulf, the jagged white shards drifting away into the blackness. His name is Alexander Malyshev. To the few who know him, he is a ghost. To the many who will soon fear him, he is a myth. But tonight, he is simply an observer. He is the emperor of the shadows, a man who has mastered the art of being unseen. The atmosphere of Leningrad in these final years is one of melancholic decay. The grand boulevards designed for czars and parades are now lined with gray, monolithic apartment blocks that seem to weep in the damp air. The statues of Lenin point towards a future that never arrived. There is a sense of exhaustion, a collective holding of breath. The system that has ruled for 70 years is running out of steam, its gears grinding to a halt. Most men look at this collapse and see disaster. They see chaos, poverty, and uncertainty. They panic. They hoard sugar and soap. They shout in the meetings of the new political clubs, arguing over ideologies that are already dead. Alexander Malyshev looks at the collapse and sees something else entirely. He sees a vacuum. He sees a blank canvas. He understands with a clarity that borders on prophecy that chaos is not an end. It is an opening. When the old laws crumble, when the police are unpaid and the judges are hungry, power does not disappear. It simply changes hands. It flows from the state to the street, and Malyshev intends to be the one to catch it. He turns from the railing, his movement slow and deliberate. His face is calm, almost expressionless in the pale light. He does not look like a gangster. He does not have the broken nose of a brawler or the gold teeth of a thief. He has the face of a mathematician, or perhaps a chess player. A man who thinks 5 moves ahead while his opponents are still setting up the board. As he walks along the embankment, the city seems to make way for him. A group of young men, loud and drunk on cheap vodka, fall silent as he approaches. They do not know who he is, but they sense something. A density, a gravity. Animals in the wild know when a predator enters the clearing. They stop grazing, their ears twitching. On the streets of Leningrad, the instinct is the same. Malyshev projects a field of silence around him. He passes the boarded-up storefronts, the empty display cases gathering dust. He passes the statues of workers and peasants, frozen in heroic poses that now seem mocking. He is walking through the ruins of a civilization, but he is not mourning it. He is measuring it. The packing of his life is slow, hypnotic. He is not in a rush to conquer. He knows that true power is not grabbed, it is accumulated. It settles like silt in a riverbed, layer by layer, until it becomes solid ground. He stops at a payphone, drops a coin into the slot. He dials a number. He speaks only a few words, his voice low and devoid of emotion. He is arranging the pieces. He is tightening the web. In a city where communication is breaking down, where the official channels are clogged with bureaucracy and lies, Malyshev's word is the only currency that matters. The white nights cast long, soft shadows. The buildings reflect in the canals, their images wavering in the ripples. It is a beautiful, ghostly city, a city of poets and madmen, and Alexander Malyshev fits perfectly here. He blends into the gray granite. He disappears into the mist. He is the calm eye of the coming storm. While others are arming themselves with knives and chains, preparing for a brawl, Malyshev is building a structure. He is building a state within a state. He knows that the people are tired of chaos. They crave order, and if the government cannot provide it, he will. He will be the roof over their heads. He will be the judge and the jury. He will be the ghost who haunts the gray city, unseen but all-seeing, steering it through the fog into a future that only he can see. The wind picks up, ruffling the surface of the Neva. Malyshev pulls his collar tighter. He looks up at the sky, at the pale, sleepless sun. The empire is dying. Long live the new emperor. Before he was a ghost, he was a body. A machine of muscle and bone, honed in the grim, subterranean world of Soviet athletics. We rewind the clock. The twilight of the 1980s fades into the deep, frozen winter of the Brezhnev era, the time of stagnation. The setting is not a palace, but a basement. The air is thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, stale sweat, and the sharp, piney scent of rosin dust floating in the dim light. This is the wrestling gym. The sounds are visceral, the slap of flesh against canvas mats, the grunt of exertion, the heavy, rhythmic breathing of men pushing themselves to the limit. Here in this windowless room, a generation is being forged. These are the sportsmen, wrestlers, boxers, weightlifters. They are the pride of the Soviet system, trained to be champions of the state. But the state is failing them. The stipends are drying up. The future promised to them, medals, apartments, travel, is evaporating like breath in the cold air. Alexander Malyshev is one of them. We see him on the mat, his face pressed against the vinyl, his muscles straining as he executes a hold. He is not the strongest man in the room, nor the fastest, but he is the most disciplined. He understands leverage. He understands balance. He knows that a fight is not won by anger, but by position. If you control the center of gravity, you control the opponent. This physical discipline is the bedrock of his character. In the gym, there is no chaos. There are rules. There is a hierarchy. The strong dominate the weak, but only if they have the technique to back it up. Malyshev absorbs this lesson into his bones. He sees the world outside the gym as a wrestling match on a grand scale. The city is just another opponent to be grappled with, to be unbalanced, to be pinned. But a wrestler cannot eat medals. As the economy crumbles, the sportsmen spill out onto the streets. They are men with violence in their hands and empty pockets. They are dangerous, and they are looking for a leader. The scene shifts. We leave the sweaty confinement of the gym for the biting cold of the Leningrad streets. It is the era of the napiorstochniki, the thimble riggers. Imagine a crowd gathered on a street corner, their breath steaming in the air. In the center, a man crouches over a small cardboard box. His hands move in a blur, shuffling 3 small cups, thimbles, and a tiny foam ball. Round and round it goes. Where it stops, nobody knows. We watch the hustle. The mark puts down a 10-ruble note, the hands fly, the ball vanishes, the mark points, the cup is lifted, empty. The money disappears into a pocket. It looks like a game of chance. It looks like a small-time con. But Alexander Malyshev looks at it and sees an industry. He is not the one crouching on the pavement. He is not the one with the fast hands. He is standing back in the shadows of a doorway, watching. He sees the structure behind the chaos. He sees the shills in the crowd, pretending to win to lure in the suckers. He sees the muscle standing guard on the perimeter, ready to break the nose of anyone who complains. He realizes that the real money is not in the game. It is in the pavement. Why steal a few rubles from a factory worker when you can tax the man stealing the rubles? Why be a player when you can be the referee? We explore this psychological leap. It is the moment Malyshev transforms from muscle to management. He gathers the wrestlers, the boxers, the men he trained with. He organizes them. He tells them, "We don't need to fight for scraps. We take the whole street." He approaches the thimble riggers. He doesn't threaten them with random violence. He offers them a service. "You pay me," he says, "and no one else touches you. You pay me and the police look the other way. You pay me and you have a roof." The Krisha, the roof. It is a concept that will define the Russian Mafia for decades. Protection. But not just protection from enemies, protection from chaos. The packing of the chapter is steady, methodical. We see Malyshev organizing his territory with the same rigor he applied to his training. He assigns sectors. He sets rates. He creates a dispute resolution mechanism. He turns a scattering of street hustlers into a syndicate. The thimble game becomes a metaphor for the Soviet economy itself, a blur of movement distracting the eye while the wealth is siphoned away. And Malyshev is the man counting the take. We see him walking down the Nevsky Prospect, flanked by his sportsmen in their leather jackets and tracksuits. They walk with the swagger of men who have found their purpose. They are no longer abandoned athletes. They are soldiers in a new army, and Malyshev is their general. He has found structure in the anarchy. He has taken the raw, brutal energy of the gym and applied it to the marketplace. He is building a machine that runs on fear and greed, fueled by the desperation of a collapsing society. The winter wind howls through the streets, scattering the snow. The thimble riggers pack up their boxes and vanish into the metro, but Malyshev remains. He stands on the corner watching the city churn. He is not playing a game. He is building an empire, 1 ruble, 1 street corner, 1 wrestler at a time. The game is rigged, and he is the one holding the table. In the geography of power, 2 mountains cannot occupy the same space without creating a valley of shadows between them. St. Petersburg in the early 1990s was a city of shadows, and looming over it were 2 titans. On one side stood Vladimir Kumarin. He was the leader of the Tambov gang, a man they called the Night Governor. Kumarin was noise, he was fire. He was a man who lost an arm in an assassination attempt and wore the empty sleeve like a badge of honor. He drove through the city in convoys of black Mercedes, surrounded by men with machine guns. He wanted to be seen. He wanted to be feared. He ruled with the charisma of a warlord, loud and aggressive, his presence filling every room he entered. On the other side stood Alexander Malyshev. Malyshev was silence. He was ice. While Kumarin shouted, Malyshev whispered. While Kumarin demanded fealty, Malyshev negotiated contracts. The setting of their rivalry was not the street corner, but the grand, smoky dining rooms of the city's best hotels, the Astoria, the Grand Hotel Europe. These were islands of opulence in a sea of poverty. Outside, pensioners were selling their medals for bread. Inside, the new aristocracy of crime was feasting on caviar and cognac. Imagine the atmosphere. The heavy velvet curtains are drawn tight, blocking out the gray reality of the starving city. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden light over tables covered in white linen. The air is thick with the smoke of expensive cigarettes and the hum of quiet conversation. This is where the Cold War was fought. It was not a war of constant gunfire, though bodies did fall. It was a war of territories and stares. It was a chess match played in a library where every move was calculated, every pawn sacrificed with deliberation. Malyshev and Kumarin sat at opposite ends of this world. two kings on a board that was rapidly running out of squares. The narration contrasts their styles. Cumarin was the brute force of the Krisha, the roof. His protection was a threat, pay me or else. Malyshev's approach was different. It was corporate. He viewed violence not as a tool of first resort, but as a failure of diplomacy. If you had to kill someone, it meant you hadn't been smart enough to find a deal. It meant you had lost control. He preferred to sit across from a businessman, pour him a drink, and explain the benefits of partnership. We are not just protecting you, he would imply. We are investing in you. He integrated himself into the businesses he taxed. He became a stakeholder. The sensory details of these meetings are precise. The clinking of crystal glasses as a toast is made, a sound that rings with both celebration and menace. The scratching of a pen on a napkin as percentages are divided. The smell of roasted meat and heavy perfume. We feel the suffocating pressure of the peace between the two giants. It is a fragile equilibrium, a surface tension that threatens to break at any moment. Every time a Tambov soldier crossed into Malyshev territory, every time a shipment was hijacked, the city held its breath. Malyshev navigated this tension with a terrifying stillness. He knew that Cumarin respected him, perhaps even feared him because he couldn't read him. Cumarin was an open book, written in bold, bloody letters. Malyshev was a cipher. We explore the psychology of this dual monarchy. How do two apex predators share an ecosystem? By drawing lines, by creating zones of influence. The city was carved up. The ports belonged to Malyshev. The fuel trade belonged to Cumarin. The hotels were neutral ground. But greed respects no boundaries. As the money grew, as the smuggling routes opened up and the privatization of state assets began, the lines began to blur. The valley between the mountains was filling up with gold, and both men wanted it. The packing of the chapter slows down to emphasize the weight of this standoff. We see Malyshev sitting in his favorite corner booth, watching the door. He is calm. He eats his meal methodically, but his eyes never stop moving. He is calculating the angles. He is anticipating the betrayal. He knows that peace is just a pause between wars. He knows that eventually one king must fall, but he is determined that it will not be him. He will not be the one to flip the table. He will wait for Cumarin to make a mistake. He will wait for the night governor to overreach. The heavy curtains muffle the sounds of the city outside, but they cannot block out the feeling of doom. The waiter pours more wine. The smoke swirls towards the ceiling. And Alexander Malyshev, the Emperor of the Shadows, raises his glass to his rival across the city, a silent toast to the war that has not yet begun, but which has already been won in his mind. St. Petersburg is a city of ghosts, and soon it will have many more. The fall of the Iron Curtain was not a single, shattering event. It was a slow, agonizing rusting of the hinges, a creaking open of gates that had been sealed tight against the world for 70 years. And when they finally swung wide, the draft that rushed through didn't just carry the scent of freedom. It carried the intoxicating, dangerous scent of opportunity. Alexander Malyshev stood in that draft, his coat collar turned up against the wind, and inhaled deeply. While the politicians in Moscow argued over the Constitution, and the people in the streets argued over the price of sausage, Malyshev was looking at the map. He saw the borders not as lines of defense, but as lines of profit. He understood that the starving beast of Russia needed to be fed, and the glutted markets of the West needed new raw materials to consume. He positioned himself perfectly in the middle, the gatekeeper of the New World Order. This chapter marks his evolution. He sheds the skin of the street protector, the wrestler taxing thimble riggers on the Nevsky Prospect, and emerges as something far more complex, far more dangerous, a CEO of the shadow economy. The setting shifts dramatically from the smoky, claustrophobic interiors of hotels to the vast, industrial landscapes of the borderlands. We travel to the dark, freezing waters of the Baltic Sea ports. Here, the air is sharp with salt, and the smell of wet rust. Enormous cranes loom out of the fog like prehistoric beasts, their steel cables groaning under the weight of shipping containers that swing precariously in the wind. The soundscape is mechanical, almost inhuman. The clanking of chains, the deep, guttural thrum of ship engines idling in the harbor, the shouting of dockworkers whose breath steams in the icy air. We move to the snowy border crossings into Finland. The landscape is white and desolate, broken only by the long, snaking lines of trucks. Their engines rumble day and night, a ceaseless, rhythmic heartbeat of commerce. They sit idling in the snow, waiting for the signal to move, waiting for the stamp on the paper, waiting for the bribe to be paid. This is Malyshev's new kingdom. It is a kingdom of logistics. The tone of the narration becomes vast and industrial. We are no longer talking about suitcases of cash passed under tables. We are talking about tonnage. We describe the flow of goods with a hypnotic precision. Going out, the blood and bones of the Soviet industrial complex. Rare earth metals stripped from military stockpiles, titanium, scandium isotopes that the West craved, aluminum, copper, timber, the assets of a superpower being liquidated by the kilogram. Coming in, the sedative of the masses. Cheap electronics that flooded the gray markets, VCRs, televisions, computers, jeans, cigarettes, alcohol, rivers of cheap vodka and expensive cognac. Food products that had vanished from the state stores years ago, bananas, chocolates, meats. Malyshev orchestrated this flow. He didn't drive the trucks. He didn't pilot the ships. He didn't stamp the papers. He owned the system that made it all possible. He understood the invisible hand of the market, but he knew that in Russia, the hand needed to be guided. It needed to be greased, and occasionally it needed to make a fist. We explore the psychological satisfaction he found in this. It wasn't just about the money, though the money was astronomical, enough to buy islands, enough to buy governments. It was about order. He looked at the chaos of the new Russia, the confusion, the inefficiency, the panic, and he imposed structure upon it. He streamlined the bribery. He standardized the protection fees. He created a bureaucracy of crime that was more efficient than the government itself. The packing of the chapter is rhythmic and mechanical, mimicking the movement of cargo. Load, transport, unload, pay, repeat. It is a machine that never sleeps, running on the oil of corruption. We see Malyshev turning raw criminal power into a sophisticated network. His influence permeates the customs offices, where officials with low salaries and high aspirations look the other way for a fee that doubles their yearly income. It permeates the police stations, where the officers drive cars bought with Malyshev's money. It permeates the city administration, where permits are signed before they are even written. He is weaving a web of silk and steel. Silk for the smoothness of the operation, for the luxury it buys, for the way it binds the city without cutting. Steel for the underlying threat, the knowledge that the machine has teeth and it will bite if provoked. He is binding the city's economy to his own will. If you wanted to import computers, you went through Malyshev. If you wanted to export scrap metal, you went through Malyshev. He was the toll collector on the bridge to the future. And yet he remained a ghost in the machine. He didn't sign the documents. His name didn't appear on the manifests. He existed in the gaps between the paperwork, in the nods and winks, in the silence of the transaction. He was the emperor of the shadows, watching his fleet of trucks disappear into the snowy horizon, knowing that every wheel that turned was turning for him. The wind whips across the frozen Gulf of Finland, carrying the snow in horizontal sheets that sting the face. The lights of the port flicker in the gloom, beacons of a new, ruthless prosperity. But inside the container, inside the truck cab, inside the warm, brightly lit customs office, the business of the new Russia continues, steady and relentless, driven by the invisible hand of Alexander Malyshev. There is a sound that ends an era. Sometimes it is a gunshot. Sometimes it is the scratch of a pen on a treaty. But for Alexander Malyshev, The sound that signaled the end of his reign in St. Petersburg was the splintering of wood. It is October 1992. The apartment is quiet, filled with the hushed luxury of expensive furniture and thick carpets. Malyshev is at home, perhaps drinking tea, perhaps reading a newspaper. He is secure in his fortress, protected by layers of muscle and money. But the state, though wounded, is not dead. And when it finally strikes, it strikes with the blunt force of a sledgehammer. The door explodes inward. The suddenness of the raid is disorienting. One moment there is peace, the next there is chaos. Men in masks and camouflage gear swarm into the room, their boots heavy on the floorboards, their voices shouting conflicting commands. Down, down, hands behind your head. The sanctity of the domestic sphere is shattered. Drawers are ripped open, spilling papers and cash. Paintings are pulled from the walls. The air fills with the smell of adrenaline and aggression. This is the transition from absolute power to absolute helplessness. It happens in a heartbeat. Malyshev, the man who moved mountains of metal and rivers of cash, is suddenly just a body on the floor, a knee pressed into his back, cold steel ratcheting around his wrists. But look at him. Even in this moment of humiliation, there is a strange calmness about him. He does not struggle. He does not scream. He looks up at the masked men with eyes that are cold and appraising. He is calculating. He is already thinking about the next move. He knows that in Russia, an arrest is not a verdict. It is a negotiation. He is taken to Kresty. The Kresty prison is a legend in stone. Built in the shape of two crosses, its red brick walls have held revolutionaries, poets, and murderers for a century. It stands on the banks of the Neva like a dark cathedral of suffering. We enter the sensory reality of this place. The smell hits you first, a damp, subterranean odor of wet stone, unwashed bodies, and boiling cabbage. The air is heavy and still, trapped behind thick walls. The soundscape is a constant, low-level hum of misery. The clanking of metal doors, the dripping of water from leaking pipes, the echoing footsteps of guards patrolling the corridors. Malyshev is placed in a cell. The space is small, overcrowded, but for him space is made. Even here the hierarchy holds. The other prisoners know who he is. They give him the best bunk. They share their food. They speak to him with deference. He is not just an inmate, he is a king in exile. The packing of his life slows to a crawl. The frantic rhythm of the smuggling empire is replaced by the dragging days of confinement. We delve into his mind during this time. He treats prison not as a punishment but as a pause, a sabbatical. He reads, he exercises, he waits. He understands that patience is a weapon. The state is impatient. It wants a quick conviction, a show trial. But Malyshev has time. The trial itself is a spectacle. It highlights the absurdity of the early Russian legal system, a system trying to find its footing in the shifting sands of the post-Soviet world. The courtroom is crowded with journalists, supporters, and curious onlookers. Malyshev sits in the cage, the kletka, wearing a suit, looking less like a criminal and more like a persecuted dissident. He commands respect even from the judges. Witnesses suddenly forget what they saw. Evidence disappears from lockers. The prosecution's case begins to fray at the edges. It becomes clear that while they have captured the man, they have not captured his influence. His roof extends even over the courthouse. This chapter explores the theme of temporary defeat. For a man like Malyshev, prison is not an end. It is merely a change of address. It is a place to regroup, to reorganize, to let the heat die down. He watches the chaos of the outside world from his cell window, the rise of new gangs, the bloody street wars, and he knows that he is safer inside than out. He is waiting out the storm. He is the rock in the river, letting the water rush around him, knowing that eventually the flood will recede. As the heavy iron door slams shut for the night, plunging the cell into darkness, Malyshev lies on his bunk, his eyes open. He is not afraid. He is planning. The curtain has fallen on the first act, yes, but the play is far from over. And when the curtain rises again, he intends to be the one pulling the ropes. The transition is blinding. One moment you are standing on the banks of the Neva River, surrounded by the monochrome palette of St. Petersburg, the gray slush of melting snow, the red brick of the Cresty prison, the black water churning under the bridges. The next, you are forced to squint against a brilliance so intense it feels like a physical weight. This is the Costa del Sol. This is Spain. The sun here is not the weak, watery disk of the Russian north, struggling to pierce the cloud cover. It is a golden hammer, beating down on the white stucco walls, the terracotta roofs, and the endless blue expanse of the Mediterranean Sea. The air smells different. Gone is the scent of cheap diesel and wet wool. In its place is the perfume of bougainvillea, the sharp brine of sea breeze, the aroma of grilled sardines drifting from the beachside caranguitos, and the subtle, expensive scent of old money. Alexander Malyshev has traded his heavy winter coat for crisp linen shirts, unbuttoned at the collar. He has traded the shadows of the Neva for the blinding light of Andalusia. After his release from prison, after the chaos of the trial and the shifting allegiances of the underworld, Malyshev made a strategic decision. The streets of St. Petersburg were becoming too crowded, too noisy, too bloody. The new generation of gangsters, the lawless ones, had no respect for the old rules or the men who wrote them. To stay was to risk becoming a relic, or worse, a casualty. So he chose exile. But it was not an exile of poverty or desperation. It was an exile of kings. We enter his villa in Malaga. It is a palace of marble and glass, perched on a hill overlooking the sea, isolated by high walls and lush gardens. The floors are cool underfoot, polished to a mirror shine. The gardens are manicured to perfection, filled with the soothing sound of fountains and the rhythmic chirping of cicadas. It is quiet here, peaceful, a world away from the car bombs and the contract killings that defined his previous life. The narration takes on a deceptive tone, a lullaby of luxury. We watch Malyshev walking through his garden in the early morning, pruning a rosebush with careful, deliberate snips. We see him sitting on his terrace, sipping a glass of vintage Rioja, watching the yachts drift across the horizon. He looks like any other wealthy retiree, a man enjoying the fruits of his labor after a long, hard career. He has reinvented himself. He is no longer the bandit king, the emperor of the shadows. He is a businessman, an investor, a patron of the arts. He is Senor Alexander. But can a shark truly live in a goldfish pond? Beneath the tan and the relaxed smile, the eyes are the same. They are still the eyes of the wrestler, calculating the leverage, watching the opponent, scanning the perimeter for threats. He is physically in Spain, his body warmed by the southern sun, but his mind is still connected to the machine he built in the north. The phone on the table next to his wine glass is a lifeline to the gray city. He holds court not in smoky, windowless backrooms, but at seaside cafes under white umbrellas that flap gently in the breeze. Men come to visit him, Russians with hard faces, bad haircuts, and expensive watches that glint in the sun. They arrive in rented cars, looking uncomfortable in the heat. They speak in hushed tones, leaning in over plates of tapas, their voices low enough to be lost in the sound of the waves. Malyshev nods. He listens. He gives a quiet instruction, a subtle gesture of the hand. Even here, thousands of miles away, his word carries weight. He is managing his investments remotely, moving money through a labyrinth of offshore accounts, shell companies, and real estate deals. He is washing the gray rubles of the 90s until they turn into clean, crisp euros. He is building a new empire, one made of property and legitimate business, an empire that can survive the scrutiny of the modern world. The packing of this chapter is languid, mimicking the slow, drowsy rhythm of the Spanish afternoon, the siesta. But underneath the relaxation, underneath the image of the idle rich, there is a low frequency of tension. It is a hum that you can feel in your teeth, a vibration in the ground. The Russian Mafia in Spain is growing. It is becoming a colony. The Spanish authorities are starting to notice. The Guardia Civil is watching. The neighbors in the gated communities are starting to whisper. Who is this quiet man who buys everything in cash? Why are there always black cars with tinted windows parked outside his gate? Why do the men who visit him look like soldiers on leave? Malyshev is hiding in plain sight. He believes that his wealth is a shield, that money is a universal language that translates perfectly into immunity. He believes that the Spanish sun will bleach away the stains of his past, that the Mediterranean will wash him clean. He thinks he has found a sanctuary where the brutal rules of Russia do not apply, where he can live out his days in peace. But silence is still his weapon. He doesn't flaunt his power. He doesn't drive fast cars through the narrow streets or throw wild parties that last until dawn. He lives like a ghost in paradise, a dark shadow cast upon the bright white walls. He is trying to be invisible, to blend into the scenery of the Costa del Sol, but a man of his gravity warps the space around him. He cannot help but be the center of the orbit. He sits on his terrace as the sun begins to set, turning the sea into a sheet of hammered copper and the sky into a bruise of purple and orange. He lights a cigarette, the smoke drifting up into the warm, still air. He feels safe. He feels untouchable, but he forgets that shadows are longest when the sun is going down. He forgets that even in paradise, the night eventually comes. The Spanish sun is warm, yes. It tans the skin and warms the bones, but it cannot melt the ice in his veins. It cannot thaw the cold calculation that has kept him alive for so long, and it cannot burn away the history that is slowly, inexorably, catching up to him from across the continent. The past is a hunter that never sleeps, and it has found his scent in the sea air. There is a moment just before a storm breaks when the air itself seems to hold its breath. The birds stop singing. The leaves stop rustling. The world goes silent, suspended in a vacuum of anticipation, waiting for the crack of thunder that will tear the sky open. For Alexander Malyshev, living in the golden cage of the Costa del Sol, that moment lasted for years. But eventually, inevitably, the sky always opens. It is June 13, 2008. The Spanish coast is still fast asleep, wrapped in the cool blue darkness that precedes the dawn. The villas on the hills are silent fortresses, their white walls glowing faintly in the moonlight, testaments to wealth and seclusion. Inside Malyshev's compound, the only sound is the gentle, rhythmic hum of the pool filter and the distant, soothing breathing of the sea against the shore below. It is a peace bought with millions, a tranquility constructed brick by marble brick. But outside the gates, the world is moving with military precision. Operation Troika is about to begin. It is not a raid. It is an invasion. The Spanish authorities, in coordination with intelligence agencies across Europe, have spent years listening, watching, gathering evidence. They have mapped the intricate network of the Russian Mafia in Spain, tracing the flow of dirty money from the gray streets of St. Petersburg to the sunny boulevards of Malaga. They have connected the dots between shell companies, real estate purchases, and offshore accounts. And now they are ready to strike. The silence is shattered not by thunder, but by the roar of rotors. Helicopters descend out of the darkness like birds of prey, their searchlights cutting through the gloom like knives, pinning the villa against the hillside in a blinding cone of white light. At the same moment, the gates are breached. Armored vehicles smash through the wrought iron, twisting the metal like lace. Tactical teams in black gear swarm the grounds, their boots heavy on the marble pathways, their voices shouting commands that echo off the stone walls. Policia al sulo manos arriba. The juxtaposition of violence and luxury is surreal, a scene from a fever dream. Men with assault rifles are running past manicured flower beds filled with exotic blooms. Flashbang grenades detonate near the swimming pool, sending plumes of water into the air, the shockwaves rippling across the surface like disturbed memories. The tranquility of the millionaire's retreat is violated by the brute force of the state. Inside the house, Malyshev wakes to chaos. But unlike the first time, back in St. Petersburg in 1992 when the doors of his apartment were kicked in, there is no calmness here. This is not a familiar game played with known rules. This is not a Russian raid where a phone call to the right general can fix everything. This is a foreign enemy, speaking a foreign language, operating under laws he cannot bend, within a system he cannot bribe. He is pulled from his bed, disoriented, blinded by the tactical lights that sweep the room. He is thrown to the floor, his face pressed against the cool, expensive tile he selected himself. The hands that cuff him are rough, professional, indifferent to his wealth or his reputation. He is not Senor Alexander, the benevolent patron. He is a target, a suspect, a prisoner. The tone of the chapter is one of inevitable reckoning. The deep sleep atmosphere is maintained by focusing on the dreamlike, nightmarish quality of the raid. The flashing blue lights of the police cruisers reflecting off the calm water of the pool, creating a disco of panic. The shouting that sounds distant and muffled through the ringing in his ears. The sudden, jarring transition from the soft comfort of a duvet to the hard reality of steel handcuffs. We describe Malyshev's arrest not as a battle. He does not fight, he does not resist, but as a resignation. He knows this dance. He knows the steps, but the music has changed and he is no longer leading. The packing is methodical, following the procedure of the law catching up to the myth. We see the police tearing through the house with efficient destruction, seizing computers, bagging documents, emptying safes that held the secrets of an empire. They are dismantling his life piece by piece, turning his sanctuary into a crime scene. We explore the years of listening that preceded this moment. The phone taps that recorded hours of mundane conversation interspersed with coded orders. The surveillance vans parked down the street, disguised as utility trucks. The invisible man had been heard all along. Every conversation he thought was private. Every deal he thought was secret. Every whisper in a seaside cafe had been recorded, transcribed, and filed away in a dossier that now weighed enough to crush him. His silence had been pierced by technology. Malyshev is led out of his villa in handcuffs, flanked by officers in balaclavas who tower over him. He blinks against the rising sun, looking older, smaller, more fragile than the legend suggests. He is stripped of his trappings. The linen shirt is rumpled. The expensive watch is gone. The aura of invincibility has evaporated. He is reduced from a wealthy businessman back to a defendant, a number in a system that does not care about his past glories. The chapter emphasizes the shock of the transition, the sudden collapse of the golden cage he had built for himself. He thought he had bought his freedom. He thought he had escaped history, leaving the blood and the snow behind. But history is a relentless creditor, and it has come to collect the debt with interest. He is placed in the back of a police van. The door slams shut, sealing him in darkness, separating him from the sun and the sea. As the convoy moves out, winding down the hill toward the city, we see the villa receding in the distance through the mesh of the window. It stands there, a beautiful, empty shell, its secrets exposed to the world. The garden is trampled. The gates are broken. The illusion of the Spanish paradise is shattered forever. Malyshev sits in the silence of the van, the sirens wailing around him like a mournful choir. He closes his eyes. He is back in the game, back in the grinder. The sun of Spain may have warmed his skin, but it could not protect him from the cold reach of his own past. He is a ghost who has been dragged back into the world of the living, and the light is harsh, unforgiving, and blindingly bright. The Spanish prison is not like Cresty. It does not smell of damp stone, centuries of suffering, and the iron tang of old blood. It smells of industrial-strength bleach, floor wax, and the sterile, air-conditioned chill of modern bureaucracy. The walls are not red brick, soaked in history, but whitewashed concrete, blank and impersonal. The bars are not rusted iron, but gleaming, high-tensile steel. But a cage is a cage, no matter how clean the floors are, no matter how polite the guards might be. Alexander Malyshev is back in custody, but this time the landscape has shifted beneath his feet. He has no army of sportsmen waiting outside the gates. He has no roof of corrupt officials to protect him. He has no bribes to offer, for his assets are frozen, his bank accounts locked tight by court orders that stretch across borders. He is alone, stripped of every weapon he once wielded with such proficiency. So he reaches for the only weapon he has left. He reaches for his own body. He stops eating. This chapter zooms in on a specific, quiet act of rebellion that defines Malyshev's character more than any crime he ever committed, more than any deal he ever brokered. It is a hunger strike, but it is not a protest for better food, more yard time, or a lawyer. It is a fundamental protest against the very premise of his captivity. It is a rejection of the authority that dares to hold him. It is a statement that says, "I do not recognize your power over me." The setting narrows dramatically to the sterile, white infirmary of the prison. The world outside, the lawyers arguing in courtrooms, the judges signing warrants, the journalists screaming headlines about the Russian Mafia, and the Tambovskaya Malishevskaya criminal enterprise, fades away into a distant hum. All that remains is the man in the bed and the slow, rhythmic beating of his own heart. The tone becomes visceral and internal. We describe the sensation of the body consuming itself. First, the hunger pains, sharp and demanding, a primal scream from the stomach that lasts for days. Then the dull ache that settles in the abdomen, a constant reminder of the void. Then the coldness that seeps into the extremities, the fingers, the toes, as the metabolism slows down, hoarding heat for the vital organs, sacrificing the periphery to save the core. The skin becomes dry. The breath smells of ketones, a sweet chemical scent of starvation. But as the flesh weakens, the mind sharpens. We explore the psychology of this decision. Why does a man with millions of euros, a man who has lived a life of excess and luxury, a man who could buy anything he desires, choose to starve? It is a battle of wills. It is a game of chicken played with his own life. He is telling the Spanish authorities, "You can take my freedom, you can take my money, you can take my reputation, but you cannot make me participate in your system. I am not a criminal to be processed. I am a prisoner of war." Malyshev lies in the bed, his face gaunt, his cheekbones threatening to pierce the skin. His eyes are sunken, dark pools in a pale landscape, but they are burning with a fierce, cold light. He refuses to speak to the interrogators who come to his bedside. He refuses to sign the papers they thrust at him. He meets their questions with silence, a silence so profound and heavy it becomes a physical force in the room, pressing down on the chests of those who try to break him. The packing of the chapter is agonizingly slow, counting the days like beads on a rosary. Day 10, day 20, day 30. The pounds melt away, leaving behind only the essential architecture of the man. The doctors hover around him, anxious, checking his vitals, pleading with him to eat, threatening to force-feed him. They are afraid. They don't want a martyr on their hands. They don't want the legendary boss to die on their watch, turning a legal victory into a public relations disaster. Malyshev sees their fear. He smells it on them. He feeds on it. It is the only nourishment he gets, and it sustains him. We explore his silence as a form of endurance. He is back on the wrestling mat in a hold he cannot break, pinned by a weight he cannot lift, but he refuses to tap out. He is enduring the pressure, conserving his energy, waiting for the opponent to make a mistake, waiting for the leverage to shift. He is using his own suffering as a lever to pry open the doors of the prison. He knows that in the West they value life. They are weak to suffering. He is exploiting their morality against them. It is a meditation on stoicism. The narration contrasts the noise of the media frenzy outside, the sensational stories about organized crime, the speculation about his network, the demonization of his name, with the absolute stillness of the man in the bed. While the world shouts his name, accusing him of everything, he is disappearing, fading away by his own choice, becoming less and less present in the physical world. This chapter humanizes the legend. It shows us the raw, stubborn will that allowed him to survive the street wars of the 90s, the chaos of the Soviet collapse, the years of exile. That will has not atrophied in the Spanish sun. It has hardened. It is now applied to a battle against his own biology, a war against the most primal instinct of all, the instinct to survive. He drifts in and out of consciousness. In his dreams, he is back in St. Petersburg. He sees the gray water of the Neva churning under the ice. He smells the diesel and the snow. He sees the faces of the friends who died and the enemies he outlived. He wonders if this is the end. If he will die here in this white room under fluorescent lights, thousands of miles from home. But he does not break. He does not ask for food. He simply waits. He waits for the Spanish authorities to blink. He waits for them to realize that they cannot punish a man who is willing to punish himself more severely than they ever could. The hunger strike is his masterpiece. It is his final con. He is gambling everything, his health, his sanity, his life, on the strength of his own resolve. And as the days tick by and the shadow of death draws closer to the bed, Alexander Malyshev lies still, a skeleton in a white sheet, proving to the world that even in chains, stripped of everything, he is still the master of his own fate. Time is a river that flows only one way. You can stand on the bank and watch it pass, mesmerized by the current, or you can jump in and try to swim against it, fighting with every ounce of strength you possess. Alexander Malyshev spent years fighting the current, fighting the Spanish legal system that sought to cage him, fighting the ghosts of his violent past that sought to haunt him, fighting his own body as it tried to consume itself in protest. But in the end, even the strongest swimmer tires. The river carried him, inexorably, back to where he began. He returns to St. Petersburg. But the city he steps into is not the city he left. The gray, crumbling Leningrad of his youth, the place of deep shadows, hushed silences, and desperate cues, has vanished into the mist of history. In its place stands a glittering, modern metropolis, a city that has traded its soul for a facelift. The neon signs on the Nevsky Prospect are brighter, flashing advertisements for Gucci, Prada, and Apple, Western brands that were once contraband, symbols of a forbidden world. The cars are newer, sleek, silent electric vehicles and luxury SUVs with tinted windows that obey the traffic lights, moving in orderly lines instead of the chaotic swarms of Ladas and Volgas. The bandit Petersburg of the 90s, the wild, lawless frontier he ruled with a whisper, has been paved over, gentrified, and turned into a European capital of culture and commerce. The tone is melancholic and reflective, a slow pan across a landscape that is both familiar and alien. We follow Malyshev as he walks the streets of his youth. He is an old man now, his hair white as the winter snow, his gait slower, more deliberate. He wears a coat that is expensive, made of fine wool, but cut in a style that is subtly out of fashion. He looks around him with the eyes of a man who has woken up from a 20-year coma. He walks past the buildings that used to house his gambling dens, his offices, where life and death decisions were made over tea. They are now Starbucks, filled with students typing on laptops. They are now boutiques selling Italian handbags to the wives of oligarchs. He walks past the hotel where he used to meet with Kumarin, the night governor. The heavy velvet curtains that blocked out the world are gone, replaced by clear, floor-to-ceiling glass that invites the world in. The smoky backrooms have been renovated into airy, open-plan conference centers, where young professionals discuss synergy and disruption. He is a ghost in his own kingdom, a specter haunting a shopping mall. The narration describes the feeling of obsolescence. It is a quiet, aching sensation, like an old wound that throbs when the weather changes. The violent thugs of the 90s, the men who fought the street wars with iron bars and Kalashnikovs, are gone. They are dead, buried in the grand cemeteries on the outskirts of the city, their tombstones engraved with life-sized portraits of them leaning against their Mercedes, keys in hand, frozen in their moment of glory. Or they have evolved. They have traded their tracksuits for Brioni suits. They have become legitimate politicians, sitting in the Duma, passing laws instead of breaking them. They have become CEOs of oil companies and banks, their criminal pasts washed clean by time, money, and public relations firms. They do not recognize him, or if they do, they look away quickly, a flicker of unease in their eyes. He is an embarrassment. He is a reminder of a time they want to forget, a time of primitive accumulation, of blood on the snow, of a savagery they have convinced themselves they have outgrown. The packing of the chapter is wandering, meandering, like a man lost in a familiar dream that has subtly shifted into a nightmare. Malyshev visits the old wrestling gym. It is still there, down the same alley, but it smells different. It smells of expensive deodorant, fresh paint, and protein shakes. The young men grappling on the mats have headphones in their ears, listening to American rap. They are training for the Olympics, for scholarships, for Instagram fame, not for the street. They do not know that the floor they are standing on, the walls that shelter them, were paid for by the Malishevskaya Brotherhood. They do not know that the man watching them from the doorway is the reason their gym exists. We explore the theme of time as the ultimate conqueror. No empire lasts forever. No king rules for eternity. Malyshev defeated the police. He defeated the rival gangs. He defeated the Spanish prosecutors who tried to bury him. But he cannot defeat time. Time has simply moved on without him, leaving him stranded on the shore of the past. He is free, yes, but his era is gone. He lives quietly in a city that is too loud for him, too bright, too fast. He is obscured by the noise of the modern world, drowned out by the ringtones and the traffic and the endless chatter of a society that has forgotten the value of silence. The emotional focus is on acceptance. There is no bitterness in him, only a quiet resignation. He understands that this is the natural order of things. The predator who survives the winter eventually becomes the old lion, watching the young cubs hunt, knowing his time in the sun is over. He sits on a bench in a park, feeding the pigeons with scraps of bread. People walk past him, talking on their phones, checking their watches, rushing to appointments. They do not see the emperor of the shadows. They see just another pensioner, another old man in a nice coat waiting for the end. And in this anonymity, he finds a strange kind of peace. He has finally found true invisibility, not the invisibility of the secret agent or the mastermind, hiding in the shadows to strike, but the invisibility of the irrelevant. He has become part of the background, a detail in the landscape of the new Russia, as overlooked as a cobblestone. He watches the Neva River flowing by, the same gray water he watched as a young man from the bridge. It is the only thing that hasn't changed. It is indifferent to his rise and his fall. It just flows, cold and deep, carrying the ice to the sea, carrying the history of the city away into the oblivion of the ocean. Alexander Malyshev closes his eyes and listens to the river. He is home, but home is a place that no longer exists except in his memory. And as the sun sets over the golden spire of the Admiralty, the ghost of the gray city fades back into the mist, finally at rest. The sky above St. Petersburg is no longer the pale, milky twilight of the white nights. It has deepened into a vast, bruised canvas of slate and charcoal, hanging low and heavy over the spires and domes. The air is thick with moisture, electric with the anticipation of release. And then it begins. Rain. It starts as a whisper, a gentle, tentative tapping against the glass of the high-rise apartments, the copper roofs of the cathedrals, and the ancient, weathered stone of the palaces. Then it grows. It swells into a rhythm, a steady, relentless drumming that drowns out the noise of the traffic on the Nevsky Prospect, the chatter of the cafes, the digital hum of the modern city. It is a curtain of water falling from the heavens, a gray veil that softens the hard edges of the architecture, cleansing the streets, washing the dust from the statues of czars and revolutionaries alike. The camera of our mind pulls back, rising up from the park bench where the old man sits alone, up past the golden needle of the Admiralty, up until the city is just a grid of lights shimmering through the downpour, a constellation of human endeavor struggling against the elements. From this height, the history of Alexander Malyshev looks small. It looks like a ripple in a vast, dark ocean, a momentary disturbance in the flow of time. The narration reflects on the legacy of the man who once called himself the Emperor, the man who believed he could tame the chaos. What was he, truly? Was he a villain, a monster who preyed on the weak during a time of national tragedy, exploiting the collapse of a superpower for his own gain? Was he a businessman, a cold-eyed visionary who saw the future of capitalism before anyone else, and seized it with both hands while others were still mourning the past? Or was he simply a symptom, a fever dream of a collapsing empire, a necessary antibody created by a sick society to purge itself of the old order. Perhaps he was all of these things, a complex knot of contradictions wrapped in a wool coat, or perhaps he was none of them. Perhaps he was just a man who refused to be a victim of history, who refused to be crushed by the gears of the state, and in doing so became its author for a brief, violent chapter. The tone is soothing, final, and deep, a lullaby for a turbulent age. We weave together the imagery of his life, creating a tapestry of memory that dissolves into the rain. We see the sweat-stained wrestling mats of his youth, the smell of rosin and ambition, the grunt of exertion in a basement gym. We see the snowy border crossings where trucks idled in the dark, their engines rumbling like beasts, carrying the wealth of a nation into the unknown. We see the blinding Spanish sun, the marble floors, the illusion of escape in a villa by the sea. And we see the gray granite of the Neva River, the constant companion that watched him rise from the shadows and watched him fall back into them. The story dissolves the man into the myth, the Alexander Malyshev of the sensational headlines, of the thick police files, of the whispered rumors in the back of taxis. He is fading now. He is becoming a ghost story told to frighten children, a cautionary tale for young hustlers, a footnote in the dense, bloody history books of the 90s. The fear he inspired has evaporated like mist. The power he wielded has been transferred to new men in new suits. The empire he built has been dismantled, sold off, and repurposed into the legitimate economy. But the silence remains. The rain washes away the blood from the sidewalks, though the blood dried and flaked away decades ago. It washes away the money, though the money has long since been spent on yachts and football clubs or laundered into respectability. It washes away the names of the dead, smoothing the letters on the tombstones until they are just texture in the stone, erasing the memory of who killed whom and why. The packing slows to a complete stop. The narrative invites the listener to let go, to release the tension of the story, to unclench the fists that have been holding on, to slow the breathing. The chaos of the wild 90s is over. The struggle is finished. There is nothing left to fight for, nothing left to win, nothing left to prove. We focus on the silence that remains after the chaos. It is not an empty silence. It is a heavy, peaceful silence, the kind that follows a long, exhausting journey home. It is the silence of a city that has seen everything: wars, revolutions, sieges, floods, and gangsters, and has survived it all, absorbing the trauma into its foundations. The final image is of the rain falling on the surface of the Neva River. The drops hit the dark water, creating millions of tiny, perfect circles that expand and vanish in an instant. Endless, indifferent, eternal. The river accepts the rain just as it accepted the ice, just as it accepted the history of the city. It flows on, dark and deep, washing the slate clean, carrying the echoes of Alexander Malyshev away into the deep sleep of the Baltic Sea. And as the screen fades to black, the only sound left is the rain, falling forever on the gray city.